Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Call 0345 6060 973.
9 minutes before 8, back to our conversation concerning that Rwanda policy, but I remind you of the headline in one newspaper today, the best-selling newspaper actually, the Daily Mail. Raab's threat to ignore Euro court rulings is their front page. The Raab to whom they refer, of course, is Dominic Raab, Justice Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister, who joins me now. Thank you for coming on the show, Deputy Prime Minister. What would make you carry out this threat? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. Well, look, let me be clear on the position. We intend to stay our plan for a Bill of Rights, as we've already published, intends to stay a party to the European Convention. But what I would say is I think it's important that not just states parties, but also the Strasbourg Court comply with its mandate. We've seen in relation to the injunction challenges to the deportation flights to Rwanda that the Home Secretary has, I think, valiantly been trying to push through. And let's be clear, let's have some moral clarity. She's doing that to stop the human rights abuses, which we see with the perilous journeys that migrants are taking and the criminal gangs that are preying and profiting from it. I think that it's in relation to those legal challenges, we had the High Court dismiss them and say it's okay to proceed. There was going to be a full hearing later on in a few weeks. There's no irreversible harm that will be done. The Court of Appeal backed it up. There was no leave to appeal to the Supreme Court. I don't think it's right in those circumstances for the Strasbourg Court, which has no power based in the Convention, to try and instruct us with an injunction of its own. And so I think one of the things a Bill of Rights can do is address that squarely.
But if it doesn't have... And you're right, you sort of played three home fixtures and you won all three, the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeal, the High Court. You had an away fixture in Europe and sadly it didn't go your way, so the game was off. But why, saying that they don't have the power... What is to stop you saying we are actually going to continue? Because you will be aware, not least as Justice Secretary, as regards the issue over prisoners' rights to vote. We've ignored ECHR before, Justice Secretary.
Yeah, there's a difference, of course, between injunctions and full adverse rulings. But what we're talking here is a power of injunction. Strasbourg Court doesn't have it. It has assumed it from its own rules of procedure, which are internal only. I think that is a good example. And by the way, I should also say, if you follow the journey of the European Court, and I know you will have done in Strasbourg, they went through a very expansive period of expanding the goalposts of human rights. They've actually been showing more restraint. Judge Spano, the Icelandic president, has been talking about an age of subsidiarity, respecting the margin of appreciation, allowing governments to pursue legitimate public policies. And that's good. This is rather a blip. But I don't think they have a power of injunction. So I think the way I would put it is this. The real human rights abuses are coming from those criminal gangs preying on this trade in misery. And it is important that we respect the parameters of the European Convention, but it's also important the Strasbourg Court does. And actually, you mentioned prisoner voting. I was the Minister for Human Rights in 2015, and we had this dialogue, and I think it is a dialogue between the UK courts and Parliament and the Strasbourg Court. And I went along to the Committee of Ministers and I explained why we wouldn't give prisoners the vote, notwithstanding some of the rulings. And we haven't, despite all the fear-mongering and the scaremongering, we haven't been expelled from the Council of Europe. So I do think it's important we can engage with Strasbourg and in a dialogue, and that's precisely why our Bill of Rights will be an important reform, and I shall publish it shortly.
When do you think the first migrant will be deported to Rwanda? This month, next month, this year, next year?
Well, I don't think I can give a precise date. The important thing to understand is that this ongoing legal challenge has been around the injunctions. There is a full hearing due in a few weeks, and all the issues can be aired there. And I would expect, and I hope, because we're confident in our position, that we get clarity from the UK courts, and then we can proceed. But of course, now there's a question mark about whether Strasbourg will intervene, and so we will need to see how that goes.
Do you ever see a position in which you would ignore a Strasbourg intervention?
Yes, as I said, look, I think you've got to be able to engage in dialogue. I think we welcome and respect the fact that since the Brighton Declaration around 2012, I think it was, the Strasbourg Court has recognised there needs to be a greater margin of appreciation, leeway to states parties. We think that they need to follow by their own approach in that regard. But, for example, with these questions of these Rule 39 interim orders, I don't believe that there's a legitimate legitimate power of injunction that the Strasbourg court has. It's not grounded in the convention. And the Bill of Rights can tackle it. It can address it squarely. It can make clear that as a matter of UK law, those do not bind us. That's a significant change with the approach of the Human Rights Act, which effectively slavishly has followed Strasbourg rulings and case law.
Now, we must come on to something I know you're keen to talk about as regards enhanced supporters in cases of sexual violence. But just a final question as regards Rwanda, Deputy Prime Minister. Are you prepared to stake your professional reputation on the fact that somebody will be in Kigali by the end of the year?
Look,
one migrant at least in Kigali by year end.
We are working very hard on this.
Mr. Raab.
Well, look, you're asking me to give the kind of cast-iron guarantee that I know, Nick, your listeners need and hanker for. Look, I can tell you I'm fully supportive of what Priti Patel is doing. I think we need some, what I would call calm focus. There's a lot of people that are going to be making all of this sort of histrionic arguments on one side or the other. I think the Home Secretary...
You're not prepared to put your professional reputation on getting one of these folk migrants to Kigali.
Well, I don't quite know what the courts are going to decide on the main hearing. What I can tell you is I'm very confident that we set out a sensible, proportionate plan which, far from eroding human rights, will protect human rights because it will help stem this flow, this trade of migrants, a trade in human misery.
Let's come very much to your brief as Justice Secretary, announcing today enhanced specialist sexual violence support to be on trial at 3 courts. What lies behind it, and geographically, where are those 3 courts, Secretary?
So look, giving victims of rape and serious sexual violence greater confidence in the system, driving up convictions is one of my top, if not the top priority. Rape convictions in the last year have risen by 2/3, but I'm restless to go further. There's a suite of measures we're taking, but one of the things we're announcing today to become operational in October is 3 specialist rape and sexual violence courtrooms in Snaresbrook, London, Newcastle and Leeds. These sites have been selected for trials because they have either high volume of rape cases going through them or a significant backlog. And the main features around these courtrooms will be video technology, so victims of rape can give pre-recorded evidence, so they don't have to add the trauma of giving testimony in front of the glare of an open courtroom on top of the terrible, appalling crime they suffered. There'll be trauma training for court staff, and there'll be the independent sexual violence advisors who can really hold the hand of those victims going through. And I think that's the right thing to do, Nick. I think it's a moral duty for us to really care for those most vulnerable of victims. But also, from frankly an operational matter, this is the kind of thing that will help us reduce victims losing faith and falling out of those cases, and therefore drive up convictions even further.
How will we know if this initiative has worked?
Well, there's about 8 levers that I'm pressing on, from disclosure rules, pre-recorded evidence, the Operation Soteria, which is basically better collaboration between prosecutors, police, and a range of others. And you'll see it because the volume of convictions will keep rising. As I say, the volume of convictions in the last year has risen by 2/3. I can tell you that the time from charge to completion of rape cases is down by 5 weeks on the last year. The conviction rate, and it's not the sole criteria, but when if you compare cases that go to trial to the ones that result in a conviction, is up from 68% to 71%. I think you need to look at all these numbers, but the number one thing is the volume of convictions going up. If you like, the target I've set myself, and I think the government is pursuing, we can't set targets for what the courts do, but what we want to try and do with the system as a whole is double the number of rape cases that get to the Crown Court. If we do that, we will make a step change in the number of convictions.
Last couple of questions, if I may. Esher and Walton, your constituency, I won't need to remind you how many people rely on the railways to get to and from their places of work, many of which, of course, are in London. And we have these said to be devastating strikes taking place at the start of next week. A reaction to that, what it means to your constituents, Deputy Prime Minister?
I think the strike action by the RMT union is deeply irresponsible. Of course, we need to look again at the structure of our railways. We've provided a huge subsidy to see them through the pandemic. And as working and commuter habits change, of course, we've got to look at that sensibly. I think that the strike action is deeply irresponsible. For my part as constituency MP, and I think for your listeners across London, but also across the country, I want to stand up for commuters and rail passengers. I am just, not only do I think RMT are behaving deeply responsibly, I'm shocked that Labour have been so openly backing the RMT, and frankly the Liberal Democrats have been, as usual, lily-livered on the subject and have not been clear. The only ones that are saying this is wrong, we stand up for the public, the Conservatives, and certainly I'm shouting it from the treetops in terms of the commuter services we've got in Esher and Walton.
All right, last subject. Lord GEIDT has, of course, resigned as the Prime Minister's ethics advisor. How much does this damage Boris Johnson?
Well, look, I would thank Lord GEIDT for his work. It's not clear why he's gone. I think that's he's given a statement that said it was right to go at this time. All I can tell you, Nick, is that he was looking for an extension of 6 months with Number 10 this week. He got a pretty gruelling scrutiny from the Committee of MPs. I know there was a commercially sensitive matter he was asked to advise on in the national interest.
What is that matter, Deputy Prime
Well,
Minister?
it's commercially sensitive, so I can't go into it, which I know is frustrating. But what I would say is there'll be an update from Number 10 later on today, but it's not clear to me the grounds on which he actually decided to leave, and he'd been expressing his desire to stay on for a further 6 months just a few days ago. So to be honest with you, I don't know more than that.
And we don't have his resignation letter published yet. Do you know why that is, Deputy Prime Minister?
I don't, but I've just seen the statement that he's given, which didn't really give much of an indication.
Do you imagine we'll learn more today?
Yes, there'll be a further update from Number 10.
All right, I'm grateful for your time today. Thank you. Justice Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab appearing here on LBC, where at 2 minutes after 8 the news is next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, Downing Street says Boris Johnson was surprised by the resignation of his ethics advisor. Lord GEIDT